Rosemary's Baby is written and directed by Roman Polanski, and it stars Mia Farrow and John Cassavetes. So, before I get into Rosemary's Baby, I hate to say this, guys, but The Lighthouse didn't come this week as I expected. It was an incredibly unfortunate revelation of mine, and so I'm gonna have to wait until next week to watch it. So I sincerely apologize to all those who I kind of told that I was going to be able to watch it this week. I thought that was the case. The website kind of hyped it up to where I thought they were going to have it this week, but apparently that's not the case. So I'm going to have to wait till next week, until Thursday the 24th, to watch The Lighthouse. But I'm also going to be watching Parasite. So on the 24th, I'm going to be watching Parasite and The Lighthouse back to back, which is just like, it's insane to think about. Because that's just like Kino overload to the max, and I'm not even sure how my brain is going to adjust to consuming that much creme of the creme cinema. But yeah, either way, I'm going to have both of those reviews out on Thursday night, so expect a review for both Parasite and The Lighthouse on Thursday night. Yeah, that's all I got to say about that. So let's go ahead and talk about Rosemary's Baby. So Rosemary's Baby is one of those iconic horror films that I just haven't seen. There's a nice handful of them that I haven't seen, but Rosemary's Baby is probably one of the top 3 just most famous and iconic horror films that I just haven't got to see yet. To be honest, I haven't really seen that many Roman Polanski films as well, which is kind of like another cinema sin. I've seen Carnage and I've seen Chinatown, so at least I've seen those, and both are pretty damn good films in my opinion. But Rosemary's Baby is one of those films that I just couldn't help to have huge expectations for. It's one of those films that if you talk to really any film lover or honestly any horror film lover, they're gonna say that it's a near damn masterpiece. And the fact that it's considered to be one of the greatest horror films ever made is totally reasonable. They're gonna say all those things about it. So, and the fact that this film came out in 1968 and it influenced so many other great horror films that we have today. I obviously have to go into this with gigantic expectations, and I gotta say, guys, there are a lot of things about this film, many aspects of filmmaking regarding this film that I absolutely appreciate, and I honestly really can't believe how it was able to be accomplished and how bold it was for the time. Because it's really easy for somebody to watch it now and to be like, oh, that's kind of been done before. Oh, here we go. That's a really cliche route to take. But you gotta understand that this was the film that basically set the standard for all of the other films that came after it to really be highly influenced by it and take inspiration with its story and its characters and even its entire aesthetic appeal as well. So that being said, the things that I really, really appreciated about this film a lot was, first and foremost, just the vision for it. The aesthetic vision to this and the overall direction approach, I thought was basically the most impressive thing about this film. The camera work was really stunning for a film that came out in 1968. Mostly the majority of the aesthetics and the camera work, it doesn't feel like 1968 camera work. It feels like something that you would see in modern day filmmaking. And the fact that this film was so ahead of its time when it comes to that is quite remarkable. And when it comes to the dream sequences, because there are a few dream sequences in this film, well, I guess dream sequences, for those who've seen it, you know exactly what I mean. But the way that those were played out and the way that those were directed, as far as the editing, as far as the way the score was used, just the overall set production and the way the entire thing was approached, I gotta say, it was incredibly visionary and really immersive and creative. And it was just really unsettling to watch because I felt really immersed into what was happening. And, for a film that came out in 1968, none of those things felt cheesy at all. All those things don't feel dated. It feels like, again, it's kind of way ahead of its time and just incredibly bold. Like, that's one of the things that I can say about this film. Like, it was an incredibly bold film to make for the time because, I haven't looked up any of, what people said about it during the time, but I can only imagine the kind of controversy and the kind of word of mouth that this film was getting because, this film does tackle subjects of like corrupt Catholicism and the overall concept of Satanism and the worship of evil, and it even tackles stuff about the kind of evil nature of top 1%ers and the rich and powerful. And I'm sure those who are huge into the Illuminati will probably go nuts over this movie. Surprisingly, you know, I haven't really heard of that many conspiracy theorists go crazy over this, but that's kind of baffling for me because this film basically takes the centerpiece of what revolves around the Illuminati conspiracy and basically personifies it in this film. And I thought, you know, it was really, really intriguing and unsettling to see because, you know, it's not like I believe any of that crazy, like, satanic stuff or anything, but to see a film take that route and create and craft a story around something that, you know, is incredibly controversial when it comes to the rich and powerful, you know, it's quite staggering to see that unfold on screen, especially for a famous film. But one other thing I absolutely loved about this film was the use of the score, because the score for this film felt so unorthodox, and this is like something I really haven't, I mean, I guess I've seen films use scores in this way, but honestly, like, the way that this film so delicately uses score for certain tense moments, it was just really awkward sounding, but but also just incredibly fitting for the tension. You know, there's a lot of use of like jazz trumpet sounds, but obviously like really off key and scattered. And again, it just really does a great job at really powering you with that anxiety. And there's one sequence in particular in the third act where the main character, Rosemary, is like, she's trying to escape her husband within her own apartment. And the way that entire scene was directed, it was just so meticulously crafted to where every beat felt calculated, and it just worked incredibly well for the tension. That's probably one of the most intense scenes in the entire film, just because of how it was directed and choreographed with the sound and, you know, with the camera work as well. And as far as the acting goes, honestly, it's pretty damn impressive. Mia Farrow gives an incredible performance in this film. She does not have an easy job by any stretch of the imagination. She really had a incredibly difficult task in this film to try to pull off, and she pulled it off incredibly well. The only thing that I'll say, and this is not even the actor's fault or anything, but like in the first act of this film, I felt like some of the characters were just giving off that classic 60s dialogue and delivery, and, you know, it felt a little artificial. I don't really know how to explain it in full detail, but it's that kind of delivery that like you would see like in old shows like I Love Lucy or something. Like it just felt, it didn't feel very authentic. It felt like they were giving lines, and, you know, I didn't feel that really for the second and third act. That kind of dwindled and kind of just diminished completely in the second and third act. But, you know, with the entire setup where things are kind of happy-go-lucky, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was really giving me that kind of artificial vibe. And, you know, I don't really know who to put the blame on. Maybe it's just the director. Maybe he could have just told the actresses to come off a little bit more natural. But then again, you know, it's hard to really criticize this film too much when it comes to that, because it did come out in 1968, and this film was way ahead of its time in a lot of different aspects. So I don't know, maybe that was just kind of one of those things that happened to kind of not withstand the test of time in a way. But either way, that's just one thing I just thought I'd note, because it was something that it kind of bothered me a little bit. But other than that, I thought the performances and the way that they were speaking in terms of all the character exchanges felt incredibly believable. And again, acting across the board was really good. John Cassavetes in this film also did an amazing job. You know, at first he comes off as a pretty chill husband who cares about his wife, and then that later devolves into something a lot more sinister. And, you know, one thing I gotta say in terms of how this film influenced a lot of modern horror films, this film reminded me a lot of Mother. And I mean a lot. Sure, this film, again, it inspired a lot of other ones. Even like Hereditary, you can make an argument that this film inspired that film as well. And, you know, along with many, many others. But this film, I felt like Mother took a lot of inspiration and a lot of influences from this film. Because, I mean, you know, for example, like even when it comes to like the neighbors and how the neighbors just kept intruding and invading their privacy and being just so incredibly nosy with what was going on in their household. That just reminded me so much of Mother in terms of how just persistent they are and just how uncaring they are about how others feel about, you know, their value in their own privacy. And, you know, on top of that, even the character dynamic between Rosemary and the husband felt very similar to Mother, because the husband character in this film becomes very selfish in terms of his own goals, and starts to care a lot about what the others think as opposed to his actual wife. And that just felt incredibly like reminiscent of Mother. And honestly, like even in some shots, like he looked kind of similar to Javier Bardem. I don't know what people are going to think about that comparison, but there are some shots that he kind of looked similar to him. But and yeah, and just also just like the struggle that the woman character is going through with Rosemary, that also reminded me a lot of Mother in terms of no one's giving a shit about her feelings like at all. And it's just like she can't help but this entire like group of people, this whole conspiracy is just kind of like, you know, weighing down on her like a big source of gravity, and there's nothing that she can do about it. And yeah, I mean, that's not really a bad thing on Mother. I just think it's really interesting that I was able to see a modern horror film that I actually really loved. I love Mother. I don't give a fuck. And I know there's a lot of people that really hate Mother. There's a lot of Mother haters out there. But I really enjoyed that film a lot. But, you know, it's just really cool to see a film take a lot of inspiration from an old film like Rosemary's Baby and really create their own monster out of it. And that was just a really cool thing that I noticed while watching it. But, you know, since I'm talking so well about it, I do have some things about this film that bothered me a little bit. I mean, don't get me wrong, I still think this is a pretty great horror movie overall, considering the time it came out and everything. But there are some things that bother me just a little bit. And one of them has to do with the fact that I didn't find this to be a very subversive film. And that's okay if that really wasn't the goal of the film. But, you know, it's just the fact that the way that this film concluded, like, it basically, it progressed into something that I basically saw coming, you know, for a long time. Like, basically since the middle of this film, I kind of predicted where this is going to go. And it's not like I even tried hard to predict it. It was just something that seemed very obvious, once conflicts start rising up. And that was a bit disappointing because I was hoping that it went into a certain route that would just kind of wow me in terms of what I was expecting. But it kind of just goes where you expect it. And then you kind of just have to hope that the aesthetics and the entire way that it was executed, just hope that that's enough for you. And, you know, it did it well. I'll have to say, like, even though I predicted pretty much everything that was going to happen in the third act, it was at least directed in a way that kept me interested, and it was still pretty captivating in a way. But, that was one thing that did slightly bother me a little bit overall. And, you know, on top of that, this film does get pretty exposition heavy. Like, and, you know, in my opinion, this really doesn't leave much, to your imagination at all. This basically just kind of gives you every single story detail and every single character detail that you were maybe, you know, pondering about. And that's kind of a letdown because, again, there's not much ambiguity when it comes to stuff like that. And I like my films to have at least some sort of ambiguity to it. And this film does have that, I guess does have that element to it, but in a different way. Like, there's nothing really confusing about what actually went on. Like, if you're confused about what happened in this film, then I don't know what to tell you, because this film basically spells everything out for you. But yeah, there was a handful of moments that I thought didn't need that much explaining. But don't get me wrong, there are some sections of the film that are kind of heavy when it comes to explaining things, but I didn't mind it in certain contexts of this film. Some of the context I was like, okay, that works, in terms of Rosemary trying to explain to the doctor what exactly is happening. That part, I was kind of like, okay, I get why they're showing that, and I thought it was fine there. But there are other aspects of this film where I just thought there didn't really need to be that much explaining. But, you know, it didn't really, really bother me, but it bothered me enough to where it maybe slightly took me out just a little bit. And, also, I guess there's one final criticism of this that I thought, like, just didn't work for me. And this is almost just kind of, like, extremely subjective at this point. Like, this really just comes down to just extreme personal opinion. But I really wasn't a fan of the introduction of this movie in terms of its use of lullaby vocals. Because, I don't know, for me, it just didn't seem very effective. It came off a bit more cheesy than it did, like, actually get me into a mood. And Maybe that's just because so many films have done it after this point that I just kind of find it like, ugh. But it just didn't really work for me that much. And even when it was used, because it's also used in the very end of this film, and I think it worked a bit better in the end, but I still think overall, like, if I was the vision behind this film, I probably wouldn't have done that. It's just not the route I would have went. I would have probably just used a more like ominous score or something. But yeah, just the overall choice of the vocals there and the music, I just really wasn't a fan of. But going back to the third act, even though I do have my criticisms of it in terms of being a slightly bit predictable, I still think it was executed fairly well, and especially the camera work there. I mean, again, a lot of modern looking techniques there of how he wanted to convey the entire third act. And yeah, I just thought even though it was predictable, it was still able to really give me that tension that I would want out of a third act. And you know, for that I still found the film overall a pretty intense and enjoyable film that's incredibly well acted, incredibly well directed, has a creative vision behind it that I thought was really well executed. And yeah, and again, a film that came out in 1968 that was just so bold with this kind of content and vision. I have to give it incredibly huge props for that, because it takes a lot for a filmmaker to put his rep on the line to come out with a film like this, especially at that time. And, you know, obviously it's paid off because it's known as one of the greatest horror films ever made. So, and, you know, after watching it, I can definitely see why people say that. So overall, I'm gonna give Rosemary's Baby a solid 8 out of 10. I highly apologize to those who do believe that Rosemary's Baby is a masterpiece. Don't get me wrong, I totally see why you would say that and why you believe that. There is so much about this film that was way ahead of its time, and there's so much in this film to highly appreciate from a filmmaking standpoint. And, you know, I can see why you say that, but just for me personally, there were some things about this film, dated or not, that, I don't know, it just didn't really work all the way for me. And, but, you know, that's just that's just kind of my take on it. Probably some things that I said about this film that bothered me probably don't bother other people at all, and they probably think I'm absolutely batshit for thinking that they're even worth of criticisms, but whatever, man. It's why I'm here, and this is my YouTube channel. I get to say my own criticism, so sorry. Anyways, the next horror film I'm gonna watch this week that's not The Lighthouse or Parasite is The Skin I Live In. I'm gonna try my best to get a review out for that by this weekend, and I'm also gonna try to get a video of my top 10 favorite horror films ever made. That'll definitely be a fun video for me to put together. So stay tuned for all that, and if you really enjoyed what I had to say about Rosemary's Baby, please give this video a thumbs up and share it amongst your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to be updated on more film-related content.